Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the Articulate Fly, and we're here with Ethan Martin of TaleTellers Fly Shop. How's it going, Ethan?
I'm doing good today.
Well, that's good. No cars in the shop. That's a good thing.
Yeah, not today anyway.
Well, so for people that don't know, we were talking before the interview about 3 weeks ago. Ethan had the great misfortune of having someone drive their car all the way into his shop. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how things are coming on the recovery side, Ethan?
Yeah, I was sitting. I tie a lot of flies as I'm in the shop for people, for whoever. So it's like 9:30 in the morning. I had just started up on another order for some people, and then all of a sudden the ground started to shake, and then I went like half deaf. And as I looked up, I've got 2 aisles in the shop that are pretty large. I guess they're like 14 foot or something like that. And the front one was about 3 foot off the ground. And then there was a table flipping through the sky and glass shooting everywhere. And I had no idea what was going on. All I knew I was like half deaf. So I stood up and then round the corner real quick. And then, of course, there's a vehicle that has decided to parallel park, or at least they were attempting to parallel park in front of the shop. And they somehow cleared the curb and then crushed in my entire window, and we're completely in the shop, and nobody was harmed, so that was good. Obviously, we lost a fair amount of product, but it's been good ever since. I mean, I had to bust my butt to get everything back in shape before Father's Day, but yeah, it was a very exciting day, and it was just an elderly guy who just mistook the or something happened with the accelerator. I'm not really sure what it was, but one thing led to another, and he came through the shop door. So it was not something I'd like to repeat again, but there was a lot of lemonades out of the lemons.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I know. Luckily, nobody was hurt, and I think you were offline for a little bit less than a week. I think you really got after, and you were reopened the Friday after the accident, right?
Yeah, it was. I worked many long hours because I built everything in here, so I had to rebuild a couple of the aisles that got smashed. And then picking up all of the inventory that got ran over, and then sort through everything on the pegs pretty much flew off. So, I had to sort through all the inventory, see what's damaged, see what's good. And we built a couple of extra little gizmos and gadgets while we had the whole shops in disrepair. So, yeah, we had a couple of really long days, but it came together. I wanted to be open before Father's Day just because I knew that I'd had a fair amount of people that already said they were trying to get rods and stuff for their grandpa or for their dad. So I was like, if I can get open before then, and it's easy for me. I'm a kind of like a goal-oriented person. It's like if I can set the goal, then I can work towards it. But if I'm just like, yeah, I'll open whenever I feel like it, we probably would be closed right now, but maybe.
There you go. Well, listen, we'll go back to kind of the traditional articulate fly format, and if you've listened before, you know that I ask all of my guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Yeah, and honestly, I've been trying to rack my brain around what it is. I know I fished with my grandpa. He's the one that taught me to fish. We fished mainly spinning gear or whatever, and then. So I grew up in Waynesboro, and I'm pretty positive that the first time I actually remember fishing was actually on the South River at Ridgeview Park. So there's this small park, and back in the before everybody got all safety conscious about like playground equipment, they had all these like wooden playground things that you get these gnarly splinters in. Like the splinters like as long as your forearm somehow slide to your toe. It's like, what the heck? But I remember I was probably like 3 or 4, and we fished the South River right there. We didn't catch a thing, but we saw these like suckers everywhere, and they've got this green metal bridge or whatever that goes across the river. And I remember as a kid, I would walk over the bridge and like look down, and you'd see these just huge suckers, and I had no clue what they were, but I always remember. Every time he came, we tried to catch him, and he always told me that they ate worms, but we never had success with that. But I do also remember I was probably 5 or 6 when, I was definitely 5. I don't know how I remember that. I just remember. We would go to Montebello, which is like a trout pay pond, essentially. And so I grew up wasting my grandpa's bank account up there because every fish you catch you have to pay for it, and as a kid you're like, oh, let me catch one more, come on grandpa, please. So I remember those 2 places for sure, and I just don't know really which one came first. And then I fished a whole lot with my grandpa just in downtown Lynchburg off of Percival's Island. Did a lot of fishing there, and he would make me collect these little terrifying hellgrammites. And I was always petrified of those things because you see the big old crazy looking jaws. But those three things are really what mesh in my mind as to like the beginnings of my fishing career.
Well, that's super cool. Yeah, I did some time on pay ponds too. If I remember, maybe going to Huff Creek when I was a kid and catching trout, and I can remember the big question mark for the parent always was, do you pay by the hour or do you pay by the pound?
Yeah.
It's like, how lucky do you feel?
Yep.
Well, that's really cool. When did you move to the dark side of fly fishing?
So, like I said, when I fished with my grandpa, and he was more of your style fisherman that was just chuck it out, sit down, you wait, and if they're going to eat, they're going to eat. And I'm not that, like, I'm kind of a antsy, like getting stuff done individual. So when I was 10, I remember my grandpa when I was 10 wanting to figure something else out for me, because we would go and fish and I would be like wanting to run around or throw rocks in and stuff, and he was fine with that. But I think he finally caved when I was 11 and got me a fly rod, and I had no clue really what it was. I'd seen he had a bamboo one that was like a South Bend. I remember casting that sometimes in his front yard with one of those automatic retrieve reels. I actually have it. He gave it to me. But so I remember him giving me the rod basically because I would go and spend a week at his house in the summers here in Lynchburg, and we would just go and fish, and I would be his shadow following him around everywhere. And I think after a while he just wanted to get stuff done, so he was like, if I give this kid a fly rod and just tell him to go start practicing casting, then he's going to leave me alone for maybe at least 40 minutes. So that's what we did. He got me a fly rod from Kmart. It was just one of those entry level things, had a couple poppers in it, and so he would set up hula hoops in the yard, and he would leave, and I would try and cast him into the hula hoops. And then we went to a couple farm ponds like 2 or 3 weeks after that here in Lynchburg, and we just demolished bluegill. And as a like a not even a teenager, 11 years old, catching like I think the first one we caught like 40 or 50, which was just unheard of for me. I was just a kid. I was used to like throwing a bobber and a worm, and you'd just sit and wait, and they would eat it obviously. But yeah, and then watching the take, it captivated me. So pretty much I got really comfortable with the whole fly fishing game pretty early on because I just liked all the different aspects to it. I'm constantly active, constantly casting. Watching the take was always cool because I did a lot of just bass fishing and bluegill fishing for most of my early teens before I really got into any sort of trout thing. And I did a little bit of time with a spinning rod again in my late teens. It was kind of like a dual interest thing. I think it was my fly rod broke or something like that. And so I went through a little span where I was like, I'll just pick up the spinning rod again. And then once I turned, it was 19, there was really no going back because I could drive, I could go wherever I wanted to, and I had a little bit more money from working summer jobs, so I got a little bit nicer rod. And then, yeah, that's been all she's wrote ever since then.
Well, that's pretty cool. And, obviously your grandfather was really important to your fishing development. Who were some of your other mentors in the fly fishing world as you kind of learned more about how the game worked?
Well, that's one of the funny things about me is I never really had any mentor. I always joke and say the river. The river was my mentor because I didn't have like one particular person who taught me anything. I listened to a butt ton of podcasts. And so that was super helpful because I was listening from all these great people that had been fly fishing a long time. And then I read a lot of books. Cause I'm kind of that generation that was like, I learned fly tying when I was 12 because I went to the library and got books about fly tying. And then as I progressed towards like my early 20s, when I really realized, hey, YouTube is a thing. So I feel like that transition for me was like, I got a whole lot of weird knowledge from a whole bunch of random places because I've watched so many YouTube videos of like streamer chronicles or you name it. So it's weird to me because I never really had like one person. Most of it was just I fished a lot, and I would like 5-6 times a week. I had the South River in pretty much my backyard, and nobody's gonna say, hey, don't go travel 2 minutes so you can fish for an hour. So I could go whenever I wanted to and make a whole bunch of mistakes, but learned a lot too. So yeah, I don't really have like one mentor other than the lake and books and
in Google.
In Google. Yeah, later in life. Google's helped me now.
Well, that's really cool. What's your favorite species to chase on the fly?
Oh man. So that's another hard thing because I kind of like it all. I guess if I had one, I would probably say brook trout. Brook trout or just native trout were some of we call them native trout here. A bunch of the old guys that come into the shop, they call them mountain trout, stuff like that. But the native brook trout here have been the one fish species that I've chased probably the longest out of the trout family because I always just like the fact you can just go take a hike here in Virginia and catch a whole bunch of brook trout on a fly rod, and usually it's a dry fly. So that's the one that I spent a whole lot of time doing. However, I say that I like fishing for everything. Like yesterday, I was on the Chesapeake Bay, we were catching the striper and bluefish and specks, and I mean I like doing that. Musky on the fly, I have a love-hate relationship with musky on the fly because it's really, I love it when they eat the fly, but I hate it when you're musky fishing and there's nothing for days. Not one day, just days.
Yeah, no. It's humbling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's I don't know that it's a better challenge than steelhead fishing, but it'll test
it's
you.
Fun. Okay, but then when you get a fish that eats on the figure eight right at your feet, like that makes it worth it. So yeah, and I like trout fishing, just rainbow. I do some of the European style nymphing stuff. I've done 2-hand, fly rod stuff. So I kind of have if you look in my closet of gear, there's just a little bit of everything.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. And are you willing to share some of your favorite places to fish? I know that can sometimes be a top secret thing.
I mean, if anybody comes into the shop, they know I fish the South River a lot. That's a river that it's got stocked fish in it, there's holdover fish, and then there's some wild fish that are starting to populate there. That one's kind of close to my heart because, like I said, that was one of the first ones that I remember fishing as a kid because I lived in Waynesboro. And then with the fly shop that's up there right now, South River Fly Shop, and then it was cool because I was kind of with the wave through of us getting all the regulations changed with it because before it was just the downtown section was a delayed harvest. And then all the regulations have gotten switched to be really in the favor of the fishery because there's spring fed, so the fish hold over really well. And so now it's catch and release, and single hook, artificial lure only, and then there's an upper section that's fly fishing only. So that's one of my favorites just because, I kind of know like every little nook and cranny of the river from fishing it for many hours. So yeah, that's one of my favorites. And then I like a bunch of the small streams. I can give you specific like I like Shenandoah National Park. And some of the streams that aren't quite as well known, the Rapidan fishes really well. So if you're looking for a stream in Shenandoah National Park, you can go fish the Rapidan. That's a fun stream.
Well, there you go. I won't waterboard you for any more spots.
Oh no, you're fine.
I
would answer.
So how about telling us a little bit about how you got interested in fly tying?
Yeah, so that's a pretty simple one too. So this is also why I think it's fly tying kits can be very helpful because I was 12 at the time, and a friend of my dad's found out that he wasn't even he lived in Ohio, but they lived near us when I was a lot smaller, and he found out that I got a fly rod, and so he was big into fly tying and fly fishing, and so they came to visit one time, and he had this fly tying kit that he got from Cabela's. I think it was like a Wapsie one or something, and he gave that to me, and that was like that was a game changer because I was always like the kid that liked going out doing a bunch of stuff, making things, Legos, you name it. As a kid, by the time you're 12, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know how I feel about it. But then I was like, hold up, this is like arts and crafts for adults that I can now make and then go use to catch fish. So that's when I started, and basically it was fly tying kit that had enough, for like 20 patterns or something. Had a little was it Cabela? No, it was a Wapsie. Yeah, it was booklet that told you, here's how you tie all this patterns. Here's this crazy thing called a whip finishing tool, which was terrifying to use as a kid because it was like nobody taught me. All I had is like 4 pictures that say this is how you do it. So yeah, I couldn't do that for like a year, but then one day it just lucked out and it happened. But most of that, I grew up on a farm too, so not like chickens, but hay, and birds and squirrels and deer. So like we would shoot a deer. And I would take the bucktail and turn it into these things called clouser nymphs. And then, or not clouser nymphs, just a clouser minnow or any random thing with bucktail. So I started doing a lot of stuff with bucktail too, because my dad, he had a couple of just tanned hides that he had gotten throughout his life. He wasn't like big into hunting, but he lived in Texas. So he had like a mule deer tanned hide, the full thing. And then I had a couple other people who had access to like skins, and like I had a whole elk hair skin for a while, and so that was pretty cool. Let's see, and then I had stuffed turkey, so naturally I always found myself pulling a couple of turkey feathers to make nymphs, that sort of thing. And then we shot a lot of squirrel. We had fox, squirrel, all sorts of stuff around. So like a lot of my materials came from the other part of stuff that I enjoyed at that age, which was hunting. I don't do much hunting anymore because fly fishing has kind of taken full reins of my life. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it though.
That's pretty cool too, because one of the toughest things. I mean, and it's funny because I'm older than you are, but I grew up in Lynchburg, and there were no fly shops. And I mean, and you know this because you really tie. Getting good materials. So, I mean, you basically were making your own.
Yeah, and they weren't always the best.
So did you learn fly tying the same way you learned fly fishing, or were there people that helped you in your tying journey that you remember?
No, it was just me on my own. That's kind of it's funny because even when I think about the shop, opening the shop has been the thing that I got like the most outside help on. But my personal fly fishing and fly tying, it was kind of like I just wanted to do it, so I did it. Like, and I looked up books, and we were fortunate because I don't know who must have donated all the books to the library, but there was a pretty good selection. And so I had checked all those books out probably like 8 or 9 times a piece over the years. And I mean, it was just like really like the Orvis Guide to fly fishing, like the old one, not the new revised one, or like the LL Bean Guide to fly tying. And it's like, so it's not like they were even these like super specific. It was just a lot of them were this more generic, but you got a whole bunch of different people explaining it, which were super helpful for me because, I might not click with the way one guy wrote it or something, especially as a kid, because I mean, it's not like this is, I wasn't a huge reader at that time. So like having all those little pictures were super helpful. It sounds childish to say it that way, but that's just the reality. And so I really learned most of what I learned at that stage just by reading people's books and then trial and error and figuring it out. So yeah, that was been a lot of my, things that I've learned in life.
That's really cool. And you mentioned earlier that your first vise came out of a Wapsie tying kit, and I can literally see the cover on that box. I think it's got a brassy on the cover, right? Which means you probably had like a Griffin vise or something like that. Was probably what was in the kit. Obviously, you've moved on and you tie professionally now. What is your rig of choice these days?
Yeah, I have an HMH. That's what I tie everything on. I have a Regal that stays in the shop. I tie a lot of stuff on that, but when I was like full into tying for other people, which was a lot of hours behind the vise, I upgraded obviously from that Wapsie one a long time ago, and then got another vise that was decent, and then I was having problems with the hooks slipping all the time. It was like frustrating to no end. But I didn't feel. I mean, it's not like you're making a ton of money tying flies. That's one of the other realities that I think some people neglect or just don't realize. But
So that's not your Lamborghini out front of the shop?
no, that's not. But yeah, so I tied flies for a long time, even for, I would guess I would say professionally, but tied flies for a long time for other people on a vise that was still like, like it was good. It had 5-star review on Amazon, all that jazz. But then I always told my wife, I was like, because this was by the time we had gotten married. We got married. We'll have our 5th anniversary coming up here. I guess I shouldn't say but. And she had always heard me talking about getting a new vise, and I showed her an HMH. I was like, man, that's the one I want to get one day. And then I came home one day, and it was sitting there on my table. I was like, what? So yeah, my wife is a great wife, Miranda. She got me the vise that I've been tying on that for a couple years now, and I don't know that I would go back because I just like the simplicity of it, and when you punch down the lock, it locks down. Doesn't matter what's in there.
And is it a specific model of HMH or?
The one she got me was the Spartan, because that one is the mid-level one, so it doesn't have all the kicks and gizzles of like the standard, but that's what we could afford, and so that's what I got. So now it's sentimental because it has like crap all over the base, and so I don't know if I could get rid of it if I could, because it was a sweet memory,
There you go. No, that's awesome. And I know that TaleTellers started as a fly company.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, you learn to fish, you learn to tie. When do you make the decision that you want to do production fly tying?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one because, so basically this was my philosophy. Just do your best. Just tie flies. I never anticipated selling my flies. That was not something that was on my radar. I wasn't trying to like make it happen. And I just tied flies. I did the best that I could, and I tied flies. And tried to stay as consistent because I have that little bit of that like OCD strain within me. And then, I would show other people my box or whatever, and they'd be like, will you give me some of those? And I'm like, okay. So I started off really honestly, like I didn't have that business like vein, like let me make money on this second. It was, yeah, I'll just give you some flies. And then
got tired of your friends mooching off of you. You're like, dude, you got to pay me.
Well, not even that. Then they started they showed the flies to their friends, and then their friends showed them would give them to them. And so then eventually I got like phone calls from a couple of people. I don't even know who they were, but it was like, hey, I'm going to Montana. I've seen some of your flies. Would you be willing to tie me a box? It was like, I've read stuff about flies in Montana, and I would be like, so what flies do you want? And then the natural thing is like, I don't know, whatever fishes in Montana. So it was like, okay. So then I would be like, ask them, well, where are you going in Montana? What time of the year are you going? And I would get a couple of questions, and then, or I call a fly shop out there or something, and then I would tie flies for them. And then that sort of led to, I was tying a couple of boxes for people. And I still have those original people that some of them I don't really honestly know how they found me. It could be, social media, because I like photography too. And that's one of the other things that I think helped, was because like people ask me, how did you start selling flies? And it's like, I just took pictures of flies and tied lots of flies, and I tried to do the best I could. But like, I have a guy in LA who's an artist out there that he was one of the first ones that gave me quite a large order of flies, and it was like 2 completely filled boxes because he just purchased a pretty large plot of area. But that guy, I mean, I'll keep him anonymous, but the artist, I mean, he still contacts me, sends me pictures of the fish that he's catching, and actually I'm working through an order for him right now because I'm still doing it a little bit even with the shop being open. But yeah, so most of my progression was I was just doing the best I could, tie every fly as well as I could, as similar to the other one as I could. And then people liked that. So it was just, hey, can you do 2 dozen of this, 2 dozen of that? And then I sold a whole lot of flies to South River Fly Shop in Waynesboro. And that was part of the other thing that helped get me going, because I tied a lot of like patterns that I had seen in books and that sort of stuff. And then when I started tying for them, it was, more patterns that people are buying on a more frequent basis, obviously. And so I started tying for them. The most I remember doing in one night was 22 dozen flies. And that was a long night. And so it got to the point that this is sort of the progression of things for me. Was it got to the point where it was like 5-6 hours a day I'm tying, and then when you actually like review how much you're making, it's like, oh, like this, and it's not just, it's really honestly because I could have charged more, or there could have been other things that I could have done, but I mean, it's like, yeah, would you be happy with $8 or $10? It's like it's not very much, like a little bit better than minimum wage, and a lot of time that goes into it, and it was fun. Don't like, I still tie for people, but that is part of the reason that led me to where I'm at today, because I realized how much I enjoyed doing fly fishing related work. I didn't want to be a commercial tyer full time, like, Patco and those guys. It's cool. They can have all that acclaim, because that's not me. I'm not the type of person who wants to sit behind a desk for, because I mean, to make money at it that you can live off of, you'd have to be doing like 12-hour tying a day, or tie bigger patterns, or tie a lot more than what I was wanting to tie. And it was nice. I got a lot of money for fishing gear, so I got a lot of fishing gear. I paid for a couple of trips with my wife. But yeah, that's kind of what it led us to. Tied, like when I look back over the books, it's like I tied thousands of flies. That's crazy. Like, what the heck was I thinking? My vice got halfway destroyed because of how many flies I was making. And it was good. Most of the patterns too were fairly simple. It's not like I was tying these like 4 hours for one fly that I'm going to charge $180 for, or something like that, which some guys do that. That's cool. To each his own. That's kind of where I'm at.
No, that's really cool. And, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I want to ask you too, about where the name TaleTellers came from.
So there's two sides to this coin. The first side is I like telling stories. I like listening to stories. So when I was an early teen, I remember I was like talking to my mom, and I was just like jabbing her ear off because of how much I was talking about probably hunting or something that she loves me, but it's not like she cares about hunting. So
she was listening politely.
Yes, yeah. And I remember her telling me, like, "You're such a tale teller." And then I don't think she was like, trying to be mean or anything, but that name sort of stuck with me, like in my head. And then when I was later in my teens, I got into like woodworking a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I mean like a little bit. I could make some basic things, And I remember at the top of them, I was making this guitar pedal case because I play guitar too, and so I wanted to have like some sort of cool thing in the top corner. I don't know what, but I remember writing in TT and not for Thomas and Thomas or anything. In my mind, I was like, if I ever had a company, I would call it TaleTellers, and I had no idea what that would be. I had no idea that would actually happen. But then when we went to look at starting the shop, I was like, there's only one name I'm gonna have. TaleTellers, and that was just the fly side of things, and saying everything tells a tale. Every fly you can catch the biggest fish or your ear, or anything that you do, you can create a tale out of it. And then it was TaleTellers fly fishing. That's what I sold flies through. And then as we have progressed to where we're at today, we switched over to TaleTellers Fly Shop to better show what we do, which is we're a fly shop, and it's been cool. A lot of people ask about the name, and so yeah, that's how it happened.
Well, that's super cool, and I want to talk a little bit more about tying before we talk a little bit more about the shop.
Yeah.
So, you've shared with us that you can spend a lot of hours at the Vice, and you don't get paid a lot of money necessarily.
No, you don't.
What are some of the other challenges that I guess we'll just call them normal fly tires would be surprised to hear that you face as a production tire?
Yeah. Well, the first one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but it's the excise tax that's on flies. Because, like, if you scroll through Instagram, everybody and their buddies selling flies, which, some people don't care about extra taxes. But that's one of the things that you got to keep in mind if you want to sell flies is there's a 10% tax on your wholesale product. So it's not like you can just buzz out 100 and forget about them and be like, oh, whoops, because Uncle Sam's going to not be happy if that ever came to light. Would it come to light? I don't know. But that's one of the first things. Like, if somebody's trying to up their game, you got to get that stuff right. and
that's the same tax that's on gear, right, that we use to fund conservation, or is that a different excise tax?
That is a little bit different. So that's on, I don't actually know what the heck they do with that money, but it's on, like, diesel, tobacco, a couple other random products, fishing tackle boxes, and then anything that has to do with flies. There are some interesting exclusions, such as if you put a marshmallow in your fly, it is excluded from the tax. And there's a couple other random things like that, but I've thought through people like, let me use marshmallow as a dubbing wax, and then I'll be. But yeah, I'm the type of guy that just rather have everything on the books, do everything clean and clear. We're all good. Don't have to worry about anything. Not everybody's that way. I get it. So have fun, but. That's one of the first things that I really wanted to mention because I see it a lot and people ask me questions a lot. And that's one of the first things, like, if you're not willing to do that, well, should you consider maybe not, because it's a $10,000 fine if they catch you. So now I don't honestly think that might ever happen, but I'd rather just do everything by the book.
Yeah, makes it easier to sleep at night.
Yeah, for me especially. So going back to more specifically, like, for people who are just tying flies and they just want to enjoy tying flies, they're not trying to sell them, that sort of thing. One of the things that I tell a lot of people that come through the shop is just tie your best. I mean, it's not like it has to be, some fancy Davy McPhail, perfectly articulated, whatever, you name it. You're just tying flies to catch fish. And like, if you're trying to up your game, well, just tie your best. If you make a mistake, go back, correct whatever the mistake was. And that's the other thing why I like tying flies, is because it takes like a couple minutes to tie a fly, depending on what it is. Maybe not much time at all. But if you're going to mess up, you can go back and you can fix that. And you're in charge of the fly. That's one of the when we have fly tying classes, that's one of the main things I like to try and get across. Like, you're in charge of what happens on the fly. Like, if you don't like the way that it looks, well, then there's just something that's off that, in all reality, you've done. It could just be you had too much thread tension or not enough thread tension. There's all sorts of, like, little it could be's. But the bottom, like, underlying principle is just you're in charge of tying the fly. So just tie it the best that you can. If you're not happy, then tie another one. That was my philosophy in getting into it. It was like, I'm more the person that I don't really care if I screw up the first 100 times, because I think maybe my 101st time I'll get it right. And so when it comes down to tying the flies, it's like, just keep tying flies. It doesn't matter what they look like, tie flies and then go fish with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of like there's no substitute for being on the water. There's no substitute for just cranking stuff out of the vise either, right?
Yeah. And there are other nice, like, some of the other tidbits, buy good materials. That's going to help you. If you do how I started and you're just grabbing random pieces of animal and tying them on a hook, well, those flies did catch fish, not a doubt about it. We had a bass pond not too far from our house that I caught a lot of fish on because, I just tied flies. And they didn't look pretty. I have gallon bags of the old flies that I tied. I think there's like 4 or 5 of them at this point. like whole gallon bags completely filled to the brim of all these crappy flies that I've made over the year, that I keep them because it's kind of a recollection, or helps me remember where I came from, and then just how much work it really did come to get to being a decent tire, okay.
And then in theory, you tell yourself that some rainy day you're going to sit down and with a razor blade and get all the hooks back. And,
yeah, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. In terms of picking out good materials, I mean, synthetics are one thing, but natural materials are another. And, obviously it's great for people to have access to a shop like yours where you tie. So if someone calls you, you kind of speak the lingo, so you kind of understand what people are looking for. But what are some tips you can give people, particularly if they've got to buy over the internet, right? Because not everyone's lucky enough to have a local fly shop to like get good stuff that actually won't create more problems for them than it'll solve.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things too that is just one of the difficulties of buying stuff over the internet is you never know what you're going to get. I've bought a lot of stuff over the internet that you get it in and it's questionable, and I say that now because like I know what I'm looking for. But like some of the things this is kind of just the way that if I find a deal that's too good to be true, like if you are searching through eBay and you find, a hackle cape that's 22 cents, you might want to stay away from that. Like it's one thing you save like, $3. Okay. But now you've got this weird thing that could be like beetle infested or who knows, that is this stuff from, India that's come over. Because especially if you look at some of the older style stuff, that's one thing that I see a lot of guys, they'll bring in like an old fly tying kit that their dad handed down to them. They're like, tell me, is this stuff any good? And yeah, no, you can use it for sure. Like a guy's brought in this, I don't know if it was an Indian cape, but it was like an Orvis package from like the 70s that said dry fly hackle. And I have, the thing was sitting in the palm of my hand, this little tiny like dry fly hackle. You had to take like 4 or 5 hackle feathers to make one Adams,
Yeah,
that's probably what you grew up on.
It's pre-Tom Whiting, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, how many feathers do we need? Yeah.
Yeah, anything whiting you can buy. and that's one of the funny things is, if it's really old, the materials do stay together. I mean, don't get me wrong, like hare's ear dubbing is going to be fine. Like there are some products like that a lot of dubbings I'm fine with, just you can buy it over the internet and you're not going to have to worry about that. It comes down to like hair, when you've got what's good deer hair, belly hair, for spinning up bugs. And my answer to that is usually if you buy Nature Spirit stuff, that's what I've gone. I'm not a rep of Nature Spirit, but every time that I've got their stuff, I've been pleased with it. And there's a couple, here and there that it's like, but it's still all usable, really well stuff. If you just buy a huge whole deer pelt on eBay, like I said, for like $4, yeah, you never know what you're going to get. But yeah, buying a reputable brand helps things. When it comes to hackle, whiting hackle, I mean, you're not going to have a problem buying whiting hackle. That's another one of the things I tell a lot of guys that are just getting into tying is like, if you want to tie dry flies, you can get a nice hackle, and it seems crazy to spend, $100 or over on feathers, but you really do use them like, I mean, I've got hackles that I bought when I was like 17 that I still have plenty of feathers on. So like it's a great investment as a starter. And then some of the other things too. So like you said, synthetics, fine, you don't have to worry about that. But like CDC, stuff like that, feathers, you never really know what you're going to get with that. Like when you're talking mallard flanks, like a buddy of mine just got back from Idaho and came from Kelly Gallup's shop, and he had a bag of mallard flanks that were ridiculous. I mean, the things are enormous. And I guess that's what he's tying his zoo cougars and stuff like that with them. But I have never seen a bag of mallard flanks that was as perfect as that bag. A lot of the stuff that you buy on the internet like that, it's going to be, you get these tiny little shriveled, like half semicircle flanks, and then you get like 4 or 5 good ones. So some things like that, you just buy it. It's like $3. You might buy 2-3 bags, and you'll get a couple of them that are good. And like when I'm thinking good, I mean like I want something that's pretty flat, has a little bit of a curve going down to it, and then a pretty decent size, But like some of those feathers that my buddy gave me are like 4 inches long. They're insane. So there's some things like that if you just get 2 bags,
yeah,
instead of 1.
Yeah, it's funny. I always keep a list on my iPhone of tying stuff, and whenever I'm in a shop like that, I just basically hit it.
Yep. Oh, if I was there, I would have a trash bag of that stuff because that's one of the things I'm always looking for, and finding it. When I find a good source, I buy it all.
Yeah, there's another shop. If you haven't heard about it, there's another fish camp that's up the valley from Kelly's place.
Yeah,
and the guy is a whiting dealer.
Okay,
and it's
the whole room.
The whole room is full of it. And he's like, and if I don't have it here, I have a bunch more upstairs. And so like, yeah, that's a place.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, something to file away. I think they close at the end of September every season. So we talked a little bit about how your frustration with being a production tire, you liked it, but you realized you couldn't make a living doing it, and that sort of pushed you towards becoming a full service fly shop. What else kind of drove you to open a full-fledged fly shop in downtown Lynchburg?
Well, so my dad owned a small business for a pretty long time, 26 years, 27, and then he sold it 4 years ago. So as a kid, I grew up, helped him on the farm, helped him in the shop a lot. And so I got kind of a firsthand look at small business, what that was like. And that's kind of, so my philosophy going into it was, first off, a fly shop is a small business. There's not a way around that. I think I've heard some people like, it's in its own subcategory. It's like, yeah, it's a small business. I mean, that's what it is. And so opening up a full servicing, I was tying 4, 5, 6 hours a night. And I was enjoying it, but I knew that there would be an easier way, or maybe not even easier, but a way that I enjoyed more making money. And all my family lives in Lynchburg, and I love fly fishing. And I'm not like super salesman-y, I guess I'll say it that way. Like my vibe is not like, you didn't walk into the shop the first time I'm trying to sell you like the most expensive rod that exists, but I can sell stuff. I know a fair amount. I always learning stuff about fly fishing. Learned a lot about, like bluefish and stuff like that yesterday. So I'm always learning stuff, but through the years I've amassed a bit of random knowledge on like jack of all trades that doesn't know a ton yet. Still learning, but I thought it would always be awesome to own a fly shop. And so my wife and I had been contemplating that through, been saving for, we didn't really know what we were going to be doing in the future, because I worked at a church before this. I was a pastor, and then there was a school affiliated, so I worked at the school too, and I enjoyed that. And the whole time I was taking like teens out from the school, I'd take them out and go fish and a lot of stuff like that. And then I did a couple of the fly shows that was just like, I showed up with a butt ton of flies. And so I really enjoyed like different aspects of that, teaching people how to fly fish, teaching people how to tie flies, because I did that too. I taught some of the teens, how to make woolly buggers and that sort of stuff. But so that was some of the things that I saw in myself that I enjoyed. And I thought, if I could do that full time, that would be awesome. Like that would be the dream. And so for myself, that's what my wife and I just started working towards, which was, what's it going to take to open a fly shop of our own? Because that's one thing a lot of people have been asking me too. And the other funny thing too is I think a lot of people think it was like, because I didn't tell a lot of people as we were thinking it through, because I didn't want somebody else to come through, and because I wanted to have a fly shop in downtown Lynchburg, because my wife and I, we got engaged in downtown. I proposed in downtown. I fished off Percival's Island when I was a kid, and I've got a lot of memories down there for catching smallmouth. And so I thought, if I ever do it, I would love to have it downtown, so I can just like walk around, or people can just walk in, that sort of vibe. And I wanted it to be in Lynchburg, and so we just started looking at places.
So tell us a little bit about the manufacturers that you carry in the shop.
Yeah, so that's been another cool thing, is a lot of the brands that I've been able to get in are ones that like I've personally always liked and used a lot of. I use a lot of Scientific Angler lines, and I got SA. I like their stuff. I've got a lot of the fly tying companies, Hairline, Wapsi, Nature Spirit, that sort of stuff. I do a lot of stuff from Nature Spirit. I like the quality of all the stuff. Bucktails, they do like just good quality stuff. So I like that. Thomas and Thomas, that's another one that I like a lot.
Yeah, that's your comp route showing through, right?
Yeah, that's man. And then I got my dad a Thomas Zone for Father's Day, and so we took it out. It was 2 Mondays ago, and that thing, it was awesome. Because my dad, he's getting into fly fishing about the past 3 years, and so I don't think he ever would have dreamed of me giving him a rod that was over $60. And then because he used a lower end rod for the whole time I was getting him into it. When he I wouldn't just hand him mine. But and he was like casting right where he wanted to. He's like, this thing is awesome. So that's some of the cool stuff too, is getting people into stuff like Thomas and Thomas, when you realize your casting could suck because your rod does, but not all the time. I say that, but I got a couple other brands. One I also like a lot is Loop. You don't hear a lot of guys on the East Coast, at least I haven't, talking about Loop, which is a company out of Europe. I don't really know how that one happened. I mean, I know the rep, and then it was just kind of like I was asking him about another company, and he was like, yeah, sure, you can have that one. And have you ever heard of this company called Loop? And I was like, heck yes, I have. And so I got some of their stuff in. I like their products. I used one of their rods. The rod that I got from my Loop rod got snapped in half when the guy drove. That was the only rod that broke when the guy drove through the shop, was my Loop rod, which that stunk a little bit, but it's okay.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
You also carry Reilly rods, right?
Yep. That was the next one I was getting to. That's the local stuff. I like that one too. That's Chuck Kraft. I've got his whole lineup in here, which is the smallmouth. Like that's the golden ticket right there for casting a lot of the bigger flies that we throw, especially like clawdads, that sort of thing. So I've got Reilly rods, and I think on the reel game, it's like 310. Loop makes some pretty sweet reels. A couple others. So, and Maxon Outfitters, which is a newer company too, and they sell a lot of the affordable equipment, that sort of stuff. So I'm still working on beefing up lines. Lines being mainly reels right now, because I'm pretty happy with my rod selection, from Reilly to TNT to Syndicate rods as well, which is more of my I've got a Syndicate Pipeline Pro 2 that's like a European style nymphing rod, and I've used that rod a whole lot, and I like it a lot.
Well, that's really good, and you've got some Umpqua stuff over there too, don't you? Yeah. So
I've got Umpqua, Fulling Mill, and yeah, I like my shop. I got Broden nets, so it's been cool and Smith sunglasses. It's been cool because I feel like my shop is like me, Loon, like stuff that I've always used or always like admired or liked, and then somehow it worked out that they wanted to do business with me.
Well, that's awesome. And so you do your tying classes every other Thursday.
Yep.
So do you have one this week?
Yes.
And so for people to know, this week is the 20...
What is it? Is it 27th is what it's going to be?
Yeah. So if you listen, so if you know then that basically every other Thursday from the 27th of June, and what time are they?
It's from 7 to 8:30 at night. We meet at the shop, and I set up a camera to my TV. So we pretty much, if you are brand new at fly tying, if you've been tying for 180 years, you can come. I wheel the aisles out of the way. We set up chairs in the whole shop. We have a lot of spouses that'll come to learn to tie with their husband. That's been pretty cool too, because I think one of the things too is there's been a fair amount of women that are looking to get into the sport, which is really cool, and tying as well. I've had a couple people who want to learn to tie, don't care about fishing. They just, they're used to quilting and stuff like that. And they were like, I saw my grandfather do this. I want to give it a go. We always have free decaf and cookies. You can bring whatever you want to drink, but I don't want to mess with all that licensing stuff. So I just say I bring decaf.
There you go. And do you need to register ahead of time, or can you just show up?
No, it's a show up. So you just show up. You can bring yourself, bring your spouse, bring your kids, doesn't matter. And we just hang out and tie. And I've got loaner gear in the shop. So if you have nothing, you can show up. It's a free event, and then we open up the shop afterwards. So like if you want to get a tying kit after.
Or buy a vise.
Yeah, you're good to go. We've had people do that. So yeah, that's one of the other cool things, has been on the business side of stuff. Everybody's like, why don't you charge for this event? It's like, because I want it to be free. Like that's not going to change. I want people to get into fly tying, not just because I'm being a selfish businessman, but because I got into it for free. A older guy paid or he wasn't even that old, but paid for me to get into fly tying, and now here I am. So like that's one of the little things that I can give back and help people understand, and I'm all for that, teaching people how to tie flies or fly fish or you name it. So
well, that's really cool, and I know that you don't officially run guide trips out of your shop, but I know that you have guides that are affiliated with your shop. So who are some of the guides that are affiliated with TaleTellers?
So my good buddy Matt Miles would be the first one. He's who I send or tell everybody about that. That's the first one. If they're looking to catch smallmouth, or he does musky on the fly trips, a lot of trout trips. So Matt Miles is the first one that I send people to. And then if you're looking for something out in the bay, there's Chris Cease is the guy. Like I said, I just went with him yesterday. There's a couple other like local guides too, that if somebody's in a bind and Matt's tied up, then I'll send them to them too. Guy Sam Scott with Blue Ridge Musky. If somebody just wants to catch a musky and Matt's booked up and they don't care if they catch it on the fly or on gear, Sam and Brent they'll put them on musky. So there's that's kind of been, and then Matt Reilly. Like, so my philosophy with the shop has been, I'm just one man, so I can't do everything, and I don't feel comfortable guiding, especially like I'm not going to guide right up Matt Miles' area, like he lives like 15 minutes from here and I'm good friends with him. So I'm not interested in doing that. I'm interested in the retail teaching side of things. That's where my vein is. I've taught people how to fly fish, not for money, but a fair amount of times. And so where I'm at is I just like being friends with the local guides, push them, give them business. Then they send their clients back to me if they're trying to gear up or anything like that. And I'm happy with that. The guides are happy with that. And so that's one of the interesting things about my shop is, and you could say, well, it's just because you don't have a very big shop, but yeah, that might be true right now. But yeah, I don't have any guides in the shop that's like, if you call me up tomorrow and say, I want to fish the James River, I can tell you exactly, where you can fish the James River, what flies, what gear. I can hook you up with one of the guides, but it would be unlikely that I would take you, if that makes sense, because somebody has to run the shop, and if it's not me, it's because we're 3 months old,
No, dude, I've got it. So I know you've got some new manufacturing lines that'll be coming in soon that you're kind of going to keep on the hush hush. Yeah. But what's your vision for TaleTellers Fly Shop in 5 years? If you fast forwarded 5 years, what do you want the shop to look like and be like?
Bigger would be the first. So right now we're in about 650, 700 square foot space, depending on if you view the bathroom as being square footage. But yeah, it'll be in downtown Lynchburg. But bigger. That's kind of my thing is, I like the outfitter. So when I say outfitter, like clothing to me doesn't really get me going. I'm not like, let me have a shop filled with clothing. That's cool. A lot of shops are like that. That's fine. It's just not my style. I like having pretty gear heavy shop. Lots of fly tying stuff. lots of flies, that sort of thing. So, if we're talking 5 years, it'll probably be bigger location in downtown, with a whole lot more flies, and a lot more product. And then the other side of things too that I'm still kind of floating around, because like I said, I'm one of the dreamer fellows, is doing more of the destination trips with people. So for example, so this is just one of the funny things. I always thought it was funny that people did destination trips and they always go halfway around the globe, and it always costs $20,000 or super expensive. So I'm still floating around with the idea of doing destination trips. So my shop, or people who would just sign up on the list, pay the money. We go to places that are closer to home, more affordable for the everyday people. There's some really great streams in Pennsylvania. Really good stuff in Tennessee. Do a trip out to Montana. So stuff like that people here in Lynchburg, or just local to Virginia or whoever, can tag along. If somebody wants to go on a trip to the Amazon, then I hook them up with Matt Miles, because he does that every year. Belize, he does that every year. So for me, that's kind of where I would like to point towards in the future, is just doing stuff for sort of both branches. So people who really just want to hang out with other fly anglers and go fish out of a drift boat, we can all go down to the South Austin and run a trip down there. And I wouldn't be guiding, because you have to have fancy licenses and things for that in Tennessee. But go with a guide group that's down there. So that sort of thing is what I'm more interested in the future. And then just having a lot more product, a lot more outdoor product too. That's another thing. I'm still floating around with the idea, but even if I get into tents or stuff like that, that's outdoor gear that fly anglers, we could take it up to Shenandoah National Park, or if it is your everyday guy who comes in who's just looking for quality outdoor materials and stuff, then he can get that too. But it would always be TaleTellers Fly Shop geared towards fly fishing.
Got it. Well, before we go, why don't you let folks know, one, where you're located, when you're open, and where to find you on the internet?
All right. So we are located on 920 Commerce Street, downtown Lynchburg. So we're one street off of Main Street. A lot of people come here to downtown. They stay in the Craddock Terry. It's this huge hotel. It's got a red boot out front, or I guess it's a high heel or something. But there's a lot to do in downtown. There's, bike trails, walking trails, the rivers, close, very close walking distance. A lot of places to eat. And that's another thing I always tell people when they come in the shop and they're visiting. It's where are you going to eat? So a lot of cool places to eat. Friends with a lot of the downtown business owners in the downtown. There's a business association here. It's been really cool watching it grow. And so that's where we are physically located. We are open right now Tuesday through Saturdays. So we are closed Sundays and Mondays for right now. And again, that's just because it's just me and I like fishing. So I spend Sundays with my family and Mondays I fish. And that's been pretty much my jive, because I like to still stay on top of things. And it's easy too, since the James is right there. I can just walk down to it and fish the James in the afternoon or morning. And then if you're looking online for stuff, you can find us at TaleTellersVA.com. Which is our website that's got a lot of the rods that we carry, the fly lines, rods, reels. I'm still getting the tying equipment up, stuff like that. Tying equipment or little tiny odds and ends I don't have up just yet online, but you can always call the shop too. You can find the number online if you just type in TaleTellers Fly Shop, or it's 434-818-2007. So I'm sure anybody would hear or remember that, but now they will, since I said that.
Well, and I'll drop it in the show notes too.
Oh, that'll work too.
Yeah.
That's all the places you can find me. I do a lot of stuff on the Instagram machine. I like taking pictures. So that's TaleTellers VA, which is just TaleTellers Virginia, in case you were wondering what the VA, not you, but anybody else. That's pretty much where I'm, if you are looking to find the most common updates, Instagram is the way to go for me, because I've got a Facebook page too. But it seems to be like most of my interactions were like, if you send me a message or an email, I'll respond to it. I mean, I've responded to some dumb things, but I usually always like to respond. So yeah, you can always send me a message if you're looking for a place to fish in Virginia. You can send me a message. If I don't know the answer, I find the answer. I'm that kind of person. It's like, I don't know. I just never liked it when somebody, just said, "Hey, this is where you should fish." So that's what I do. I'll ask other people and say, "This person is talking about possibly fishing in this area. Where should they go?" Or stuff like that. So yeah, you can always send me a message. Anyway.
Well, that's awesome. And Ethan, I appreciate you spending time with us. And folks, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. And if you like the podcast, do me a favor, leave us a review in iTunes and subscribe in the podcatcher of your choice. Tight lines, everybody.
Bye.